often because their lives are so difficult that they are pressed into the criminal system, we throw them away. We do not lavish care. We do not treat them in their cases as if they matter. And we're never going to find the remedy. We're never going to invent or come up with or pay for the remedy as long as we don't care enough about these millions of people. And so that's part of why the conversation is so important. Of course we need money. Of course we need lawyers. Of course we need better rules. But we need to collectively decide that it matters.
Welcome to the Stay Free Forever podcast, episode 20. I'm your host, Clifford Fewel, with a special guest today who has insights that relate well to this podcast's stated collective mission of the justice involved, that is, to adapt and thrive. If you or someone you know are currently trying to navigate the American legal system, you may already know how overwhelming, confusing, and unfair it can feel. Today, we'll look behind the curtain a bit to consider how courts operate and for whom. My guest is Alexandra Natapoff, professor of law at Harvard Law School. As co-editor of and contributor to a major book arriving July 7th, America Unfinished, 250 Years of Law and Governance, Professor Natapoff will discuss a collection of 1,000-word essays by Harvard Law School faculty members, 64 of the country's leading legal scholars and experts. It's a compilation that basically allows these smart people to come together as a faculty and say what they're thinking about, what troubles them, what they're grappling with as individuals. Professor Natapoff's journey into law began at Yale University and Stanford Law School. She spent years on the ground as a federal public defender in Baltimore and has a really strong grasp of what it's like for common people trapped in the gears of the system. Her previous award-winning books, Snitching and Punishment Without Crime, exposed how the government, wittingly or not, used plea bargains, informants, and minor misdemeanor charges to entangle millions of ordinary citizens. Professor Natapoff has a gift for speaking in plain English about complex things such as how the misdemeanor web operates, why minor legal encounters carry such major consequences, and how understanding these systemic pitfalls can help folks navigate how courts actually work. And I hope to talk a little bit about what true justice could and should look like. Welcome to the Stay Free Forever podcast, Alexandra Natapoff.
Cliff, thank you so much for having me.
It's really a privilege, and I just think your book is so timely, and I congratulate you and MIT on pulling this massive publishing effort off in time for the actual anniversary. Do you care to speak to that a minute?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a miracle. We owe an enormous debt of gratitude to MIT Press. You're right. Books don't usually come together this quickly, but MIT Press really felt that it was historic, that it was important, that it was an opportunity to share information and analysis and insights that really have not been shared in this way before on this 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So we all worked around the clock to make it happen. And I should mention for your listeners, the book is coming out the weekend of July 4th. It's available on the MIT website and Amazon and everything else. But one of the wonderful things about this book is 6 months after publication, in other words, in 2027, the book will become open access, meaning that anybody can read it for free, anywhere, all over the world. And we really think this is an important piece of the conversation. We as Americans need to be having this conversation, and no one should be cut out of that conversation, frankly, because they don't have 26 bucks. So we're very, very happy about that.
This is great. This is I think a perfect book to do this with, and I honor the collaborators for doing this and MIT Press for making that decision, because that will be cutting them out from some revenue, but there's still a lot of us out there who like to have a physical book and take it with us, and I think it works out well for everyone. So thank you for mentioning that. In editing this book, you and tell me if I'm saying his name right, Guy Uriel Charles.
It's Guy, actually, Guy Uriel Charles.
Thank you, Guy Uriel Charles, as co-editors, had a big job ahead of you. I thought it was really great that at the beginning of the book, you publish the Gettysburg Address and the Declaration of Independence for reference. So I'd like to begin there. Tell me what this has to do with it. From Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It is for the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. How does that relate to your book?
Yeah, thank you for flagging that. So the title of the book is America Unfinished, 250 Years of Law and Governance. And frankly, we stole the title from the Gettysburg Address, the phrase you just read, because as we were grappling with what we hoped to share with this book, it really was this sense of a collaborative project that remains unfinished, even after 250 years. A conversation about what we want our polity to look like, what we want our legal system of governance to look like. And so we thought that Lincoln's words about the unfinishedness of this project, of course, he was referring to the project of inclusion and equality that the Civil War was fought about. And he ends the Gettysburg Address by reminding us that the endeavor was to create a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And 250 years in, that project is still unfinished. So that's where the title came from. But on this anniversary, it behooves us to look back at our founding documents, the Declaration, but also the Constitution, the Gettysburg Address, foundational principles that have brought us this far. So that's why we included that text for folks who want to go back to first principles.
Yeah, very well done. And speaking of the Declaration, governments derive, this is paraphrasing, governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Wherever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it. To that, please.
The consent of the governed. So Professor Charles and I, Guy Charles, we've been colleagues now for years, and we always grapple with what does it mean to be a legal scholar? We were both formerly practicing attorneys, myself as a federal public defender, as you mentioned, and Professor Charles as a voting rights attorney. And we're always grappling with what does it mean to be engaged in law, whether we're lawyers or whether we're scholars or professors and whether we're teaching it. And the reason that we're so invested, I think, in the legal project is really captured by that phrase that you just read. The idea that law is the infrastructure through which we get to govern ourselves. You think, what's the alternative to that? Well, the alternative to that is the most powerful person in the room with the biggest stick gets to decide, whether that's a stick of state authority, unchecked state authority, or of course, or private wealth and influence and private power, or frankly, the power of violence. The alternative to those exercises of brute force is a legal democracy that permits us to govern in ways that we all can participate in. And so the consent of the governed, rule of law, the idea that we have a legal democracy and not ruled by the most powerful at any given moment who happens to be in the room, that really captured for us the motivation for the book, and also frankly explains why we feel really honored to be able to do this work. Yeah,
and I thought it was great how you synthesized that. People say law and lawyers, and sometimes they get a negative impression, but in maybe it was in the introduction you wrote, it is the law that allows me to ask the question, is this fair? Is this right? Should we be doing something different?
So as academics, as scholars and teachers, we have a very particular kind of privilege and benefit under the aegis of free speech and the First Amendment, which of course is academic freedom. Mm-hmm. But all of us need free speech in order to engage in this legal democratic conversation about whether we want to run our system this way. You and I are talking now quite generally about American democracy, but I know later in the conversation we'll get to talk a little bit about our respective areas of expertise, which is the criminal system in particular.
Yeah.
And having a discourse, a conversation, an argument, a debate about how we should run these all-important engines of governance and power, it requires free speech. If you're a teacher and a writer, it requires academic freedom. Otherwise, the person with the biggest stick in the room, who has the most power, who doesn't like what you have to say, gets a chance to shut it down. And so all these things are interrelated: law and democracy and free speech and participation and the involvement of ordinary people in having this conversation about how we would like to consent to be governed.
Yeah, well said. And ordinary people has been my focus, just by virtue of being at first an unwilling prison guard, also known as a correctional officer, and seeing the most ordinary of the ordinary and how the extraordinarily confining circumstances that they find themselves in really got me to thinking a lot about this, especially when I saw this book that you wrote up and your particular essay, which I could probably, every podcast could probably do 100 episodes on this book. But I think your essay is right up my alley, and I suspect that's why it was suggested to me. American Criminal Law from Inequality to Impunity, by Professor Alexandra Natapoff. And you cite 7 things that millions of America suffer from in a systemic breakdown in the basic operations of the criminal process: illegal stop and frisk programs, racially motivated arrest practices, unconstitutional bail proceedings, profiteering from fines and fees, abysmal failures to provide constitutionally required defense counsel, harsh sentences for minor conduct, and violent, even lethal jail conditions. That is something that the bottom, you describe a pyramid. That is something that exists at the wide bottom of this pyramid, and that you've written earlier books about, snitching and the misdemeanor book. Why was it important for you to mention these early on in your essay?
Yeah, thank you so much for framing it that way. One of the things that's happening in the public discourse today is that people, especially people in elite legal spaces and elite criminal spaces, are shocked. They say, this establishment, that
say that one more time. Alexandra, I'm sorry, you froze up for a minute. One of the reasons
that, for example, prosecutors and the Department of Justice have so much discretion to go after people, that so much of their power can be used recklessly or in an unchecked fashion, and it's hard to that prosecutions are motivated by improper reasons. They're shocked that rules are being broken. They're shocked pardons are for sale in the open market, for buy their way, that the wealthy and the privileged can buy their way out of punishment. And these are shocking things, and we should be talking about them. And they in place spaces that we're not used to seeing them. But I was a federal public defender in Baltimore 20 years ago, and we saw privileged and wealthy people able to escape criminal punishment while ordinary people and the vulnerable were swept up in policing. We saw corrupt policing. We saw the breaking of rules. We saw the violations of rule of law. And so what I wanted to try to convey in the essay is that ordinary people, vulnerable people, working people who can't buy their way out, and can't hire fancy lawyers from fancy law firms to get judges to pay attention. That ordinary people have been subject to injustice throughout the criminal process for as long as we can remember. And I and you have been thinking about these issues for many years. I have written about specific aspects of those kinds of failures. I call them governance failures because that's what they are. We govern through the criminal system, and when it abuses ordinary people, that's a governance failure. And so now we're in a moment in our democracy where people who are not used to that kind of treatment, who are used to thinking the court system will work for me, my lawyer, my status, my role in society will make it work for me, they're starting to realize I might not be protected. And I think this is such an important moment for us to be having this conversation as a community, as a polity, because once you feel that fear that maybe the rules won't protect me, maybe I'm going to be out there on my own, maybe this authority, this prosecutorial authority, or the FBI or this investigative authority might go after me for the wrong reasons. And so many ordinary people live with that fear all the time for themselves, for their children, depending on where they live or their resources. And capturing that kind of injustice, I think, that we have an opportunity at this moment to appreciate what so many people have been going through for so long, because now some people who are not used to that world are going, oh my God, this is terrifying. So it's sort of a moment where we could come together and have a deeper conversation about our criminal system.
Yeah.
Hopefully the essay gives some insight into that.
And boy, it does it. Your last sentence in the essay: rule of law in the criminal system has always been elusive for the powerless. Now the rest of us are learning what that feels like. So at this point, someone who is powerless might say, good, it's about time. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'm going to edit your proposal there a little bit. I'm going to do a professorial privilege.
Please
I think
do.
that ordinary people who have suffered through this system might say, welcome to our world. Nobody should have to live this way.
Yeah.
Not because we wish ill on anyone, but because it isn't right that so many people should be afraid of the criminal system, should expect to be treated in unlawful and unfair ways, under sort of cover of darkness in the shadows. And so I think it's fair to say, everybody, look, welcome to our world. This is what it feels like. As you mentioned, I have worked in many different kinds of spaces. So in Baltimore, I worked in neighborhoods made famous by the riots after the police killed Freddie Gray. Neighborhoods that have suffered from over-policing and from poverty and from joblessness and all kinds of afflictions, and seen how not just how law worked there, but how people understood the law to work, that it was not for them, it was not on their side. The kids knew. It's heartbreaking when a 13-year-old explains to me that they understand that the police are not to be trusted, that they are not on that side. And I have also worked in elite spaces. I have attended and worked at fancy law schools. I have worked in fancy federal courts. I have clerked. I have been around some of the best, frankly, some of the most expensive lawyers in the country. It's a different world. And that's not right. That idea of the pyramid, what I call the penal pyramid, there's a little top there that the rules kind of work the way they're supposed to. But for most people, not so much.
I think your example of the living room, the basement and the living room, is really instructive. Would you talk about that a little bit?
I was trying to capture this surprise. And I don't have the book in front of me, so you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the sentence went something like, the murky waters of the criminal system's basement are now rising up into the main house, and they are flooding the living room. And the flood is startling. The living room inhabitants are not used to seeing these kinds of conditions. And that's what I mean by saying this is a moment for a conversation that sometimes is tough to have. It's tough to engender empathy and understanding, I think, in the minds of people who can't imagine what it would be like for police, to just abuse their authority and flagrantly violate the Constitution in their homes and against their families, or to have prosecutors go after them for the wrong reasons and to have no one stand up for them. So it's I hope, I'm not celebrating the flood into the living room, to be clear.
Yeah.
But I do think it's an opportunity for us, and especially for those of us who have worked for so long in the criminal system, a moment to be speaking about it.
Yeah. I'm reminded of this scene in As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt, where she's got an ill child, and Jack Nicholson is wealthy and is interested in her romantically, and so he feels bad about some faux pas he made, and so he pays to have a really good a pediatrician see her son, and she writes him this 60-page thank you note because she is so gratified that she is finally getting the proper attention for this son, this asthmatic son of hers. And if we could point forward a little bit, wouldn't it be great if people who are caught in that whole misdemeanor web that you described could finally see something working for them? What would be a start? What could work for someone out of all the writing you've done that would make people feel that sort of, wow, this system can work for me?
So the classic answer, of course, in American democracy and our constitutional criminal system is the right to counsel.
Yeah.
That the reason we have the Sixth Amendment is the idea that by giving people counsel, that lawyers, that the defense attorney, the public defender can open up the doors of the law so that everyone can benefit from it. As the Supreme Court says, that the amount of money a man has should not determine the kind of justice they get. That's the ideal. As we all know, that ideal has not been made real. System, we do not spend enough money on the defense bar. It's woefully underfunded. A good half of the defense bar is not, the public defense bar is not even in public defender offices. It's overworked panel attorneys who are paid a lowball number by courts with very little, if any, incentives to provide good representation. So we have not built a defense bar, a public defense bar that could meet that standard. But as you and I both know, even if we spent enough money, even if we had great lawyers for every indigent defendant, it still would not fix all the different woes, all the different injustices of the criminal system, because by the time you're charged and come into court, it's too late. You've already been racially profiled. You have already been locked up for weeks or months because you couldn't afford bail. There's nothing your lawyer can do about the fact that bail is set unconstitutionally high. You have already been disrespected or been subjected to the violence and danger, and as we saw in COVID, the disease in prisons and jails. All things that a public defender can do nothing about. At the end, we can fight about it. We can complain. We can say, in retrospect, that shouldn't have happened. But it's, in many ways, it's too late by the time your public defender is appointed to fix many of the ills of the criminal system. And I say this as somebody who was very proud to be a public defender, and I was very fortunate to work in an office. It was a federal office, so it had excellent resources. I had time to represent my clients. I spent time with my clients. There was no limit to how hard I could fight for them. That is not true for most public defenders.
Mm-hmm.
And even I, with all those resources, could see it was, in many ways, it was too late for me to be helpful on so many of those fronts. And so the right to counsel is just a beginning. as I have tried to convey, in this work that I've done to try to air out, to show this is what's happening to people. This is not just, this is not right. We should be running America this way. We need to care in all the ways that a democratic polity cares. Sometimes it's spending money, but it's not only about money. Sometimes it's about lavishing attention, getting upset when it doesn't work. Attention, having the media pay attention, having politicians pay attention. And we throw people who end up in the criminal system, often because their lives are so difficult that they are pressed into the criminal system.
Mm-hmm.
We throw them away. We do not lavish care. We do not treat them in their cases as if they matter. And we're never going to find the remedy. We're never going to invent or come up with or pay for the remedy as long as we don't care enough about these millions of people. And so that's part of why the conversation is so important. Of course we need money. Of course we need lawyers. Of course we need better rules. But we need to collectively decide that it matters. Yeah.
If I'm a low-level offender caught up in this web, is there a way, knowing what you know, is there a way for me to advocate for myself better than most people do? Are there things I can do to read or to say or to search for in terms of resources that will help me not get stuck like millions are?
Yeah, great question, right? Because as educators, we want to say something like, knowledge and education has got to be available to people. One of the reasons that people suffer in the criminal system is because they don't know that they have the right against unreasonable search and seizure, or they don't know that they have the right to make certain kinds of decisions in their cases. Their lawyer can't decide for them, for example, whether to plead guilty or not. People don't know. But it's not that simple. To say to a person, recite your rights when you are pulled over by an armed police officer under circumstances that are frightening. And knowledge is often not enough of an antidote to genuine, well-founded fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I myself, I'm a former public defender. I'm a very well-educated lawyer. I'm a law professor. And yet I have been pulled over by police officers under circumstances where I knew I shouldn't have been pulled over. And my first reaction was not to recite the Bill of Rights to them. It was to try to get out of there safely.
Yeah.
And so it's here in the ivory tower, it's a little bit easy to say, if you only knew. Yes, we need to make sure that people understand how our criminal system works. But it is not enough. And frankly, the reason we have the Sixth Amendment, to come back to our earlier point, is because the drafters of the Constitution, of the Bill of Rights, and the Supreme Court realize you can't do it by yourself. You need help. You need a lawyer. You need the system to work for you. It can't be that the individual is facing off against the state, whether it's in the form of a police officer or a prosecutor or a judge. We all understand that that's not a realistic ask of individuals, and it's not how a democracy should work.
Right.
So this is a long game. Helping people is a long game.
I imagine most people say too much.
You mean when they're arrested or when
Correct.
they're in a case?
Yeah.
Yeah, fear is a real pressure cooker, and there's a lot of pressure on people to try to negotiate, work with, treat each stage of the criminal system as the police officer, after all, is a person, or your parole officer is a person, or the judge is a person. And I do think that education, I hope, for example, that the essays in this book, and let me just add, not just the section on criminal law, although there is a robust section on criminal law, but there are sections on free speech and dissent, on the federal government, on the role of the Supreme Court. And I think the more we understand, we all understand, ordinary people who are subject to these rules understand the thicket of how complicated it is, the better they can navigate the system when they get into it, whether it's the criminal system, whether it's the family court system, whether it's immigration, whether it's civil rights, whether it's their employment, whether it's a labor union, whether they're battling it out with a corporation that has violated a contract. Knowledge is important, but sometimes knowledge is not enough. We need to come together to make sure that knowledge really is available to and can help ordinary people who frankly are so often outgunned.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Sure. I just did my fourth and final Zoom class for some federal probationers last night, and they spent a good portion of the final hour griping about the constraints of probation and how it's like being incarcerated in the real world. And one of them said that the library has been his friend, and that the library not as a place to go find knowledge, but also libraries offer meeting spaces, and you can talk in libraries now.
Yes.
And so as a simple point of access, if someone is charged and has a court date coming and they're scared out of their wits, to, with the communication tools we have now online and via social media, to say, I'm going to the library on Thursday night and I'm going to be in this room and I'm studying this because I'm having this problem, and anyone who has this problem is welcome to come because I don't know what to do. Does that seem plausible?
It's actually a wonderful description of the heart of democracy. That for the consent of the governed to be true, to be real, we have to be able to come together and talk about it. Not just in Congress, not just in fancy places, but in the library, in our places of community. We shouldn't have to travel to the Capitol, to Washington, to be able to have a conversation about how our system actually works. And I'm so glad you picked the library as the example. I should mention, we talked at the outset about how this book collection will in 6 months become open access.
Yeah.
The book itself, of course, will continue to be on sale, but if people don't want if they want a free version, they'll be able to get it online. But for the next 6 months, the book will be on sale and there will be some revenues for MIT Press, to the extent that there are any royalties for us as editors, for Professor Charles and me as editors. We're donating those royalties to our local library. Because for the exact reason that you just articulated, which is that libraries, schools, public meeting places, parks, public spaces where people can feel safe to have conversations. We talked a little while ago about the First Amendment and free speech. Well, free speech doesn't do you much good if there's no place where you can do it.
Yeah.
And so for folks who are interested in that, I would recommend to them the third section of the book, which is a section on free speech and dissent. It talks about not just free speech, but protections against viewpoint discrimination, the right to petition, all the pieces of the puzzle that make it possible to talk. And libraries and places, community spaces like libraries are so important for people to feel like they can learn, not just online. Well, it's tricky to know what's true online these days, but to talk to other people, not just for knowledge, but for community, and to know that they're not alone.
Huge. Yeah, because everyone feels when they're charged with a crime that this is happening to me and me alone. And that fear really does constrict that sense of outreach. And it's precisely the moment when I think people do need to outreach. So I appreciate that. Thank you. You have, is it half the faculty of Harvard Law School with essays in this workbook?
Yeah, more than half.
More than half. So what was a typical reason for not participating from those who elected not to?
Just to frame that a little bit. So we invited the whole faculty to participate once Professor Charles and I realized, oh, we shouldn't just be talking about these things. We should be inviting our colleagues for all of us to speak together.
Yeah.
And as we discussed at the beginning of this conversation, we were a little bit under the gun. And so we said to our colleagues, we want you all, and you have a couple of weeks, and you can't use any footnotes, and it can't be more than 1,200 words. And because in order to make the project work and to work with MIT Press, we had some constraints.
Sure.
And so there were folks from many, there was no typical reason, but unfortunately there were many of our colleagues who just sort of, given the realities of the situation, couldn't pull together what we needed them to do in that time. So many of our colleagues, for example, are currently working on books of their own.
Sure.
So they're under deadlines to produce words for somebody else. Some people were on leave. Some people had family obligations that took up, it only takes a few weeks to take you offline before it wasn't available. So the fact that someone didn't participate, I don't think it's fair to infer that they didn't want to. I know many of my colleagues did want to, but this is the beginning of this conversation here, not the end. The book is the beginning. And so we are going to have more conversations, seminars, panels, conversations with our students in the fall that will include folks who wrote essays for the book, but also faculty members who didn't get a chance, who are going to bring their insights to the table. So we see this as an opening of conversation, not a finished product at all.
People are dying for a sequel already. What haven't we talked about that you think is particularly important about this book and about what you're trying to say to what you and your colleagues are trying to say to our country right now?
Yeah, it's 250 years of this democratic experiment. Really, I think, really encourages us to just stop and consider what it is we are trying to accomplish. And many people, I think, use this word experiment. Mm-hmm. What do we mean that it's an experiment? Well, when they drafted the Declaration of Independence, which everyone can read at the beginning of the book, mm-hmm. That was a radical document. The idea that in a world of monarchies, where the king just gets to tell you what to do, or maybe the Pope just gets to tell you what to do, that a nation would rely on the consent of the governed, of regular people who have rights to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. That was a radical idea. Now, to be clear, the founders, their vision of equality and rights and individual liberty, of course, was famously limited and hypocritical. It did not include women. It did not include Black people. Of course, it did not include the enslaved. So that notion of what does it mean to be part of this polity, that itself was unfinished at the time and has evolved. Part of American history is the attempt to extend and complete that vision so that it could let go of that hypocrisy, so that it could let go of that narrow vision. But even with that said, it was a radically inclusive idea at the time. And as we work on all the pieces, so if you look at the table of contents of the book, it's like a cookbook. I don't know, maybe not all of your listeners like to skim through a cookbook, but you don't read a cookbook from beginning to end. Say, I want to think about side dishes. I want to think about desserts. And this book is a little bit like that. There's kind of something for everyone. There's a section, as I mentioned, on free speech and dissent. There's also a section on war, on the war powers, and another essay about the impact of the way we run our federal system on veterans. There's a section on the environment, climate change. There's a section on how do we regulate new technology? How do we think about the impact of AI on the future of our democracy? And what does consent of the governed mean when we are all awash in this kind of AI-generated information? There's a section, this is one of my favorite sections, I'm going to just take a minute to pitch it. It's called The Future of Economic Governance. And one of the things about Harvard Law School is that it has some of the leading scholars of corporate law, how we organize the management of capital in the United States and globally. And so we have essays about the challenges that world of the organization of capital and corporate power is facing now at the 250th. Next to essays about labor and the history and the future of not just the labor movement, but other organized worker organizations for ordinary people who have to compete with and often battle with the organization of capital and corporate law. In that section, we also have essays about the history of American democracy's response to concentrated wealth, the wealth of landowners, the founders, the wealth of industrialists, of course, the wealth of the South during the Civil War. We have essays on the design, this is a great essay, the design of money, which we never think about money having a design, but it's just an instrument of credit. Yeah. That dollar is a promise to pay. That's a legal structure. An essay rethinking the distributive consequences of literally how we make and design our money. And all of these essays are by really different scholars. They have completely different viewpoints and points of entry into these questions, and yet somehow they're all answering the same question. How do we organize money, corporations, governance, wealth, work, labor in a democracy that purports to honor the consent of the governed? And it's a mind-blowing collection. In just 20 pages, you kind of get this masterclass in thinking about the American economy and its relationship to democracy. So there are all these different sections, and what I hope people will do when they take a look is delve into the ones, not just criminal law that we're having a conversation about, but take the opportunity to read what these are national experts. These are people who have dedicated decades of their lives to studying these issues. And they don't agree with each other. It's fabulous to read these different essays, and this one says this, argues this, and another one argues something else. And these are really smart people, and they don't agree. Yeah. And so I guess what I want to say about the book is that I hope people use it for their own purposes. What would you like to know? 62 different pieces of the puzzle held up to the democratic light by people who think about this stuff for a living, hopefully in a form that anyone can read. You don't have to be a lawyer. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a scholar. I hope high schools will take a look. I hope students in all kinds of institutions will take a look. I hope bookstores, I hope libraries will take advantage of it.
Yeah,
like I said, like a cookbook, the parts that they're interested in.
That's a great way to describe it. And I noticed you described they're professors, but they're economists, they're philosophers, they're lawyers, but but they're also teachers. And just about everyone can remember a really great teacher that they had. And it occurs to me that these are the people you talked about in another interview you did, how Harvard Law School graduates 500 elite lawyers every year. Um, well, these are the people who teach those elite lawyers, and they have not gotten to Harvard by being boring or pedantic or monolithic in their thinking. These are really excellent teachers. That's kind of you put an emphasis, some italics on the word teachers. We're all teachers, and so that I found just in reading the few essays I've read that teaching element comes through because each essay has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it takes you on a nice little journey through something that you probably never thought about before, or at least not in this way. So I commend each of you for the way this worked.
Thank you so much. That's such an important part of this project is the teaching aspect. Of course, first and foremost, we have an obligation to our students. I hope they don't think we're pedantic. We probably are sometimes, but
Sure.
try not to overdo it. But it's a real responsibility to be a teacher. Whether you're teaching at a law school or whether you're teaching in a high school, when you're a lawyer and you're representing a client, often you are your client's teacher. You have to explain, this is the law that we are dealing with. These are the consequences you need to understand so you can make good choices. We're always teaching and conveying. And so I do hope that these essays and this book are helpmates, are teaching vehicles for all kinds of students and all kinds of institutions.
Yeah, I suspect that it will have that effect. I think you're onto something with this idea. I think the execution is darn near flawless, and I really look for it to be successful. And I look forward to reading the rest of it. As you know, Alexandra, there are two parts to our particular podcast interview today. The second part has us each share a quote, a passage that has some meaning to us that we find compelling or interesting, and to share it and talk about it a little bit. Who would you like to go first?
Is it okay if I share a couple of my favorite quotes from the book?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have two?
You may
Can I have
two.
This is me negotiating. This is me lawyering.
It's Tuesday, so it's not only 2 for Tuesday, but you get a bonus third one if you want. Go.
I get it. No, there are two. Okay.
All right.
One is about the book itself, and it's from the introduction, actually. And I think it really captures the spirit of something we were trying to accomplish. And the quote is, we think, and this is me and my co-editor writing this, we think that the best way to appreciate our academic freedom is to exercise it. And that's really what this book is. This book is us coming together and saying we are so privileged to have the protections of an institution like Harvard, a university, academic freedom, to say things that frankly, maybe many lawyers might not feel as free to say. You can't chat about your clients' cases. You can't experiment with your clients' cases. Your speech has to serve that purpose. The freedom to think it through and to experiment and push the boundaries, that's really a unique opportunity. And so we wanted to celebrate and appreciate the fact that we have that by pushing ourselves a little more to work together and to speak more. And as we discussed earlier, you can't separate academic freedom from freedom of speech, from law and democracy. They all are talking to each other round and round and round. And so we wanted to step up, because we have been accorded such privileges. So I think that really captures something about the spirit of the book for us, for me.
Sure.
And then the other quote, this is from the essay that I wrote that we talked about a little bit. And you and I talked about this injustice in our criminal system, where for most people, so much of the criminal system is broken, the rules don't work. We don't lavish care and attention on the cases, on the people. Whereas for a fortunate few, for the people who can get the system to pay attention, who have the resources or the status, rule of law works pretty well. The Bill of Rights is a really protective thing if you can get it to work for you, if your lawyers could get it to work for you. And so in the essay, I say, rule of law is not rocket science. We know how to do it. The reason that we don't do it for most Americans is not because we haven't figured it out. We figure it out all day, every day in high-profile financial crimes, in fancy federal cases, in high-profile cases with, lawyers billing $2,000 an hour. We know how to do rule of law. It's just that we haven't chosen to share it with everyone. We haven't chosen to invest in it. And sometimes I think there's some hand waving like, oh, it's complicated and it's too much. No, it's not rocket science. We know perfectly well how to do it. We're just choosing not to.
Right. And we're letting ourselves get overwhelmed at the vast bottom of the pyramid, public defenders with too many cases to manage. And so they have to give everyone the short shrift. People need to remember that. I would say that to my attorney. I would say, I know this is complicated, but I know it's not rocket science. We need to find a way to defend me so that I can keep my job, keep my apartment, and not get sucked into the vortex of what do you call it? Governance failure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too rosy about it. It's not enough to have a good lawyer.
Right.
It's not. Sometimes the laws can be harsh. Rule of law says there's a 30-year mandatory minimum for that amount of crack. Rule of law doesn't mean that the outcome is just. It doesn't mean that it's fair. It doesn't, we see that all the time, particularly when I was practicing in the war on drugs in particular. Young people with enormous promise who had so few resources in their lives, and they were being thrown away in the war on drugs. The criminal system was throwing them away, according to law, not because it was lawless, but because that's how the rules were written.
Sure.
But the difference between lawlessness, the violation of rule of law, and injustice perpetrated according to law, is that in a democracy, we get to have a fight about changing the rules. And we can say, you know what, we shouldn't have 100-to-1 crack cocaine disparities in sentencing. And eventually, Congress changed it. Why? Because we had a multi-year fight in the public sphere about how that was so unjust and it disproportionately affected Black people. And we all could see that that was wrong. Rule of law and a legal democracy has a built-in mechanism for change in which we can all participate. That's what consent of the governed means. That's what it means to go to the library with everyone who's interested and have the conversation. And say, you know what, this is wrong. We should have an argument about changing that rule. When no one cares about the rule, there's no recourse. It doesn't matter whether you change it or not, because no one's paying attention to it anyway. That kind of sloppiness at the bottom, that kind of, who cares? That kind of dismissiveness, I think, is part of the injustice at the bottom, and that the privileged and the wealthy, that they're not used to experiencing the system saying, we don't care what the rule is. We're going to do it anyway. Oh my goodness. So getting even a little taste of that can be really shocking.
Sure. It is a pivotal moment. Would you like to hear my quote?
I can't wait. You could have two, since I took two, if you would like to.
Well, all right. If I get two, we're pushing an hour. Are you okay with that?
It's your hour.
I know, but still, you have a busy schedule, I'm sure. All right, so I'll do my bonus one first. From It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding by Bob Dylan. He wrote, "And when we meet again and introduce his friends, please do not let on that you knew me when I was hungry and it was your world."
Mm.
And I like that because I relate to the idea that we all come from somewhere, and some of us advance, and some of us advance, but in a less dramatic way or a less successful way. And people who you were once tight with will treat you with distance and aloofness. Um, and I thought it captured that. And it has an aspect of name it, own it, and ask for what you want. And I tell that to my misdemeanor and felony offenders all the time. You know, what did your PO say to you when you told him you're really unhappy with the number of times you have to submit a UA and how it's affecting your ability to get a better job? Well, I didn't. You know, he'll just get mad at me. Well, maybe he will, but you're telling me you didn't tell him. You didn't put it out there. And so that's one of the things that I think a skill everyone needs to develop is to name it, own it, and tell it to the people who matter. Don't complain about it to your coworkers unless you're also going to complain about it to your boss. Does that make sense?
I'm gonna have to go back and now listen to that song.
But the point, I mean, I think people do need to be able to advocate for themselves and say what's on their mind to someone who can do something about it. Even when I was in the corporate world in newspapers, people would come to me and say, "So and so stealing my territory." And I said, "What did they say when you told them about that?" "Well, I'm not going to. Well, talk to them first, then come talk to me." So self-advocacy, can I get a vote for self-advocacy, please?
Absolutely. Can we also add a vote for people who are wielding power to open the door for self-advocacy, to not punish people for speaking?
Amen.
Because it's a two-way street.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. My prepared quote actually came to me when I was on a business trip to Washington, D.C. in the 80s. And I was walking around just amazed by all these, institutions of governance. And I was standing in front of the IRS building, and I looked up and it said, "Taxes are what we pay for a civilized society." And at that point, I was just a new taxpayer. And I was kind of, feeling like, oh man, I have to pay taxes now. But when I saw this, and I saw the Department of Justice and the IRS and the Health and Human Services and all that, I thought, yeah, that's right. All this stuff is not free; it has to be paid for. And that made sense. It's attributed to, take your pick, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., the former Supreme Court Justice in 1927, in a case he lost, or that he was the dissenting opinion against the tobacco company, or Thomas Jefferson. But the point is, it gave me a lifelong appreciation of the fact that, fine, I will pay. I'm not going to bitch about taxes, because taxes serve a purpose and they could certainly be better used. But that meant it spoke to me in that moment.
And I think it brings us all the way back to the beginning, which is it's also related to this idea of the consent of the governed. Because the idea that we pay taxes for a civilized society is also quietly an announcement that we trust our government to use our taxes to create a civilized society. And what do we mean by civilized? Well, that is the democratic conversation. And so it's never one without the other. Consent of the governed means that we can trust in the institutions that then can fairly ask from us, whether it's paying taxes or, frankly, to obey the rules, even if we don't like them. Even if we don't like what's in the criminal law, we agree to obey them. So it's really the same as your previous quote, which is we speak, but also the powers that be need to listen, and we need to be able to trust them.
Very well said. I can't imagine a better hour of conversation. I haven't had one like this in a while. Thank you, Professor Alexandra Natapoff. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Lovely to meet you.
Likewise.
The Stay Free Forever podcast is recorded and produced by Clifford Fewel, owner of Stay Free Forever, LLC, a Colorado and Wyoming company. Stay Free Forever provides adult and youth life skills courses via both e-learning and mailed workbooks, plus Zoom classes for any age group. Our theme music was composed and performed by James Benjamin Fewel. Editing and technical assistance are provided by Mary Tulin. My name is Molly Moore. For more information, go to stayfreeforever.com or email clifford@stayfreeforever.com.